What if, after the events of Resident Evil, Umbrella contained all mutated tissue, went offline, and rebranded what was once built? Cross-mutation via existing tissue from RE. Resident Evil and Dead Space enemies look very identical in a sense, to the point where you can technically call necromorphs superior zombies. If zombies evolved in RE, isn't it possible for them to evolve into sci-fi species if the timeline was linear? Especially when these zombies orbit from space. Is it possible that Umbrella went into space, found use of their existing bio by containing all of RE's biomass, and merged it with necromorphic bio somehow to create offsprings? Meaning, theoretically, Umbrella could be manipulating the CEC and Unitology, the Church of Unitology, from behind the scenes, or it is simply the CEC and Unitologists, since Umbrella can possibly be hiding under the guises of different corporations, one of them being the CEC, and took religion into their own hands by hiding behind Unitology to further thrive in the completion of their agenda by creating brother moons to take over the universe. Complete universal saturation. Before I let you know what they potentially did, let me start by saying why I believe this theory is so significant to begin with, starting with the developers. Dead Space took heavy inspiration from Resident Evil 4, and the devs said it themselves that they were going for Resident Evil space, while Dead Space was in development.
Resident Evil 4 had just come out. One of the things I would say to the team is we're going to make Resident Evil in space, and you got it right away.
Creative director Ben Wenat stated the vision behind the making of Dead Space and how RE4 played a pivotal part in Dead Space's influence, admitting that the reflection and gameplay from Dead Space is a lot more similar to RE4 on purpose. Resident Evil taken to a whole new level, a whole new generation in the future. Quote, when Resident Evil 4 came out, we were just awestruck by it, Wenat told me. We were all playing it and we were like, holy shit, this is a really awesome game. They're actually trying to tell a story. They got some cool cinematics. The gameplay systems are fixing a lot of problems, bringing it into this action realm, but keeping this intense horror feel to it. It was this amazing combination, and oh, the enemies were so freaking cool. Wenat didn't shy away from admitting that Resident Evil 4 is one of his favorite games of all time, and it's clear looking at Dead Space that he wasn't alone at EA Redwood Shores, later Visceral Games. He stated after, and quote, it's pretty obvious when you play Dead Space to look at it and go, yeah, it's almost like they decided to make Resident Evil 4 in space, which is exactly what we were doing. Dead Space, which started development in 2006, just a year after RE4's release in 2005, was originally going to be the third entry to System Shock. It was RE4 which made the devs go in a different direction, which led to the cancellation of what was supposed to be System Shock 3, but thank goodness we got Dead Space. RE once again being the seed in which Dead Space can stem from. It says here, but it wasn't always that way. Early on in its development, before Resident Evil 4 had even been released, Dead Space was a completely different game. Rumors have circled around the sci-fi horror game's early days, reinforced by similarities found within Dead Space. During our discussions, would not confirm them to me. It was like, everybody, get your System Shock 2 copy, play it start to finish, and let's figure out what we're going to do. Recalling the early days of development, then Resident Evil 4 came out and we were like, oh no, this is the shit. However, Redwood Shores couldn't just change the name of its project and work on something completely new. It says here again in quote, it was at a time at EA when there was no appetite for original IP. It seemed like everybody else was doing it except for us. While Redwood Shores created games based on James Bond, Lord of the Rings, and The Godfather, Wenat said the desire to make something original was fervent within the studio, and Resident Evil 4 was the catapult they needed. It says here in quote, we were so hyped about Resident Evil 4 and we got obsessed with improving the mechanics, Wenat said. The team truly wanted to develop a first-rate survival horror game. However, convincing EA to bet on an original idea wasn't going to be easy, and that was something that co-director Glenn Schofield, now the GM of Sledgehammer Games, would work on for a long time. Schofield would break the ice on the idea, show some promising progress, and over time, slowly build the confidence EA needed to give the project a thumbs up. This is the main reason why I feel this theory has so much meaning to begin with. The devs were gratefully open about the inspiration they took from RE4 to create Dead Space. Dead Space can be a metaphor to Resident Evil by it being the next stage in Resident Evil, symbolizing evolution. Dead Space being Resident Evil's future. I feel that's exactly what the devs were going for. Some could say Dead Space is considered a more intense horror game, sometimes deemed the true sequel that Resident Evil fans didn't get until RE7. Playing the Dead Space remake especially, players of the community even begin to pick up on the fact of how inspired the remake is to RE4 and or RE4's remake, to the point it's like night and day. So is it so far-fetched to believe that Dead Space is technically Resident Evil Space in the most confidential way imaginable? I say it isn't so far-fetched. Here's why. Umbrella, under the guise of their CEC and unitology, managed to gather space mining metals and resources for reasons that could have been used for their further plan of the outbreak in 2508. The CEC, being the corporation largely operated unchallenged throughout the 25th century, also have strong ties to the Church of Unitology, meaning most members of the CEC worship Unitology, a religious cult that worships markers and pursues convergence, which is Umbrella's endgame plan. Awaiting the predetermined outbreak in 2508, Umbrella waits patiently, growing incorporation and religion behind the scenes. Umbrella, under the guise of unitologists, brought corpses aboard the USG Ishimura ship for the infected could start the infection process, leading to the necromorph outbreak upon the ship. From the occurrence of the outbreak, an automated SOS was sent from the USG Ishimura to CEC. A distress signal which drew the attention of USG Kellyan. When USG Kellyan went to investigate, what they came across was necromorphs who were already aboard the Ishimura. With nothing but rampage and blood drenching the Ishimura corridors, there is no one left but Isaac to restore hope for humanity. Post-destruction of the Red Marker on the Isha 7 colony surface, the Hive Mind was defeated by Isaac, and Isaac returned to the emergency ship under the influence of the Marker. Fast forward to the events of the third game where the Brethren Moons are the final antagonists, colossal sentient necromorph entities that serve as the final stage in a necromorph life cycle after convergence. Their purpose being to consume all organic life on planets and populate them with necromorph lifeforms. The Brethren Moons being Umbrella's secret weapon to gain control of the universe with the most superior species known to mankind. Now that we know the common procedure of Umbrella's plan, it's time to dissect the procedure of how they went behind the scenes and what could possibly be deemed suspicious. Suspicious acts that you could put the blame on Umbrella for. Michael Altman was killed for Umbrella to take over the Unitology religion. Says here in quote from Wiki, "When the black marker was first discovered on Earth so long ago, the government at the time hid all evidence of it from us. When our prophet Michael Altman spoke out against them, he was silenced by possibly Umbrella. In 2214, a geophysicist named Michael Altman made a discovery that would change history. Buried at the impact site of a crater near the Yucatan Peninsula, he uncovered a divine alien presence, the Marker. The Marker spoke to Altman and revealed a plan that would unify mankind and lead them to a bright new future. Apparently, later after the finding of the Marker and his announcement, Altman was apprehended and brought back to the research facility, where he soon bore witness to a necromorph outbreak that ravaged the compound and killed most of the staff. Though Altman managed to escape the outbreak in the seeking facility, he was captured by Markov as well as Stevens, a psychologist who had been working alongside him. Stevens and Markov revealed themselves to be believers in the Marker's ability to create eternal life, and in this supposedly benevolent intention of leading humanity to convergence. As the two men needed a way to get the rest of the world to share his faith, they decided to use Altman's death and apparent martyrdom to found a new religion that would prepare mankind for the common convergence. All here stated by the wiki. With that context in mind lands me the question, was Steven the Markov's Umbrella spies, since they've been believed in the Marker's capability to create eternal life? Even when Altman was forced into hiding, allegedly for fear of government retaliation, his acolytes Stevens and Markov risked everything to bring his word into light. His book sold out within hours. Millions flocked to conferences where we were taught the greater truths of the Marker. We stared in awe at the evidence of this alien artifact that would change everything, and we did whatever Altman, through his acolytes, told us to. We rallied against the government, whose apprehension kept our prophet from us. We joined together in congregations to share his word, and we prepared ourselves for the future he said was coming. Where were you when Michael Altman was assassinated by our government? It's the question of our generation, I suppose. It's certainly the day when everything changed for me, and the world. The martyring of the scientist turned savior, Michael Altman, Beget fanatical zealots, who wouldn't be outraged by the images of his broken, brutalized body, as if a clean death wasn't enough? Who wouldn't be moved by the stoic Marco struggling on the verge of tears during his eulogy? In those terrible days, we birthed and maintained the tenets of a new religion, known now as the Church of Unitology. I was only a follower, but I was suddenly part of the biggest social movement in history. The riots that followed and the crippling of our government on colony after colony made me realize we finally had the power to change things. After Altman's death, Stevens and Markov began to twist the truth about his fate, and even publishing books in his name, fueling interest, civil unrest, and demands for action against the government, revealing only Altman's data that would support their conclusion about the marker's divinity. Stevens and Markov helped found the Church of Unitology to continue what they claimed to have been Altman's vision. Since then, Unitologists have worshipped the geophysicist as a mere seer figure for their faith and interpreted the black marker to be a sign from God, supported by fragments of knowledge from Altman's notebooks that were provided by his two acolytes, that being Stephen and Markov. Altman's body came into possession of the church, and centuries later, it had been stored in one of the many stasis capsules that were sent into deep space aboard the massive ship of the church mausoleum fleet. The CEC's unlawful activities in connection to the Church of Unitology. The CEC apparently had no qualms about partaking in illegal mining operations, and it is noted that the Isha 7 planet crack was not the first of the company's unlawful activities. Though there are persistent rumors that the CEC frequently engages in illegal mining of restricted worlds, the company's influence in deep pockets have kept most of its critics quiet.
We need to rewire the junction boxes, but we get the ADS cannons back.
Good. Isaac, about what Daniel said. I don't know about any illegal mining or the marker. I swear, I'm just here for a repair mission.
Look, Hammond, I don't know you or Daniels well enough to judge, but CEC had to know about the marker.
The company, maybe. But shit like that's above my pay grade. Look, we can get into it later. You'll need a way down to those junction boxes. You can turn the atrium elevators back on from security. You'll have full access.
The CEC is also heavily linked to the Church of Unitology, as it sent the Ishimura to retrieve Marker 3A for the church after it was found by the colonists on Isha 7. The extent to which the company is linked to the church was evidenced by the actions of CEC Executive Director of Colonial Mining Operations Warren Eckhart, who was responsible for swapping out much of the crew of the Ishimura with a Unitologist prior to his mission to Isha 7. Eckhart screwed us good, didn't he? If a CEC director could go that bad, maybe the whole company's rotten to the core, just like Isha 7. The CEC's founding date isn't stated, but maybe that can be leaked to Umbrella since they have an unknown origin, considering RE is technically far in the past. Unitologists brought corpses aboard the ship for the infector could start the infection process in the morgue. While an infector did board the ship via a shuttle to start the process in the morgue, the Unitologists had already created the perfect environment for the outbreak to happen by packing the ship with corpses, since he swapped out most of the Ishimura crew with Unitologists. Says here Warren Eckhart was the executive director of colonial mining operations for the CEC and secretly a devout member of the Church of Unitology, responsible for seeding believers throughout the USG Ishimura prior to his mission to Isha 7. Warren Eckhart, being one of the members of the CEC and a devout member of the Church of Unitology, can very well be working for Umbrella behind the scenes, since it's high authority executives like him who could easily have higher connections, those who have high authority access, actively facilitating the necromorph outbreak as part of a fanatical belief in convergence, which is the final step in Umbrella's last endgame plan. Unitologists, including the captain, ensured the ship could not effectively stop the spread of the infection, often sabotaging safety measures. But we also can't forget that necromorph aliens existed 2 million years ago, along with the markers on Tower Atlantis. In the failed convergence event, all alien necromorphs remain frozen until the event of Dead Space 3. Can this mean that these aliens been existed in RE's universe ever since? While various apocalypses were happening in RE, they were frozen this whole time. 2 million years ago is the far past, and Dead Space is the future. Who was responsible for deactivating the machine which led to the completion of the incomplete Brother Moon? Who's humans? Who were the humans that did it, to be specific? Could that have been Umbrella? Maybe the world could have ended a long time ago due to a past successful convergence event. Their long survival in frozen state highlights the resilience of the necromorph, as they were not truly dead, but rather in a dormant state. It says here the resulting moon was not fully formed and was left inert, frozen in orbit for 2 million years. However, the moon remained conscious and continued to send out a signal, which was later interpreted by humans as "turn it off," urging them to deactivate the machine. The moon on Atlantis sought to use incoming species, like humans in Dead Space 3, to disable the freezing machine, which will allow the 2 million-year-old convergence to complete and create a fully formed brother moon, as it explains the origin of the frozen wasteland in Dead Space 3 and the existing of the brother moons, which layers it down to the brother moon being Umbrella's primary weapon to take over the universe. The moons playing the role of spreading the necromorph infection to ensure their survival, bringing unity by turning all life into a single dead entity. With all this in mind, Resident Evil being responsible for Dead Space is happening, I am curious to know who is the mastermind from RE, who is the mastermind that was controlling everything behind Dead Space the whole time, if Resident Evil happens to be connected to Dead Space. I believe Dead Space wasn't supposed to happen without Umbrella taking control of everything. Everything being the CEC, the Church of Unitology, and maybe other secret doings in Dead Space that we aren't too aware of if you actually connect the lore of the two games into one cohesive storyline. I do, however, have huge bias that Wesker is still out there before, during, and after the events of Dead Space, at least until after Dead Space 3. I like to believe that Wesker might have been the mastermind behind all of these happenings in the first place. But didn't Wesker die? Not his consciousness. With the knowledge of Zeno from RE Requiem, who shares a scary resemblance to Wesker, it's very possible that his consciousness lives on in the future while the host can die. Zeno being the host, while Wesker is the consciousness. So who's to say that this whole time Wesker has been using his consciousness to take control of the universe, the future where necromorphic species rule in superiority throughout the entire universe. I am curious of who Wesker could have been using to further his agenda, since Zeno is the primary example of that, but I guess that will remain a mystery. I also like to think that this whole time while Wesker was watching Ada and Leon, what if the practice from the Los Illuminados were repurposed by the Church of Unitology in order to entice the followers to follow the marker? Since when you die in both religions, you become a quote-unquote superior version of yourself. It's almost like history repeating itself, just stronger religion. Unitology playing more of the deceitful role through belief in unity. Not the type of unity one would expect, however. Both somewhat symbolize death and rebirth as a whole. On another note though, I do want to believe that Wesker was the true reason behind Dead Space in the most metaphorical way possible. The devs of Dead Space being the masterminds for it to technically be Resident Evil's future, considering Dead Space is just Resident Evil in space. Wesker's master plan being to rid the universe of organic existence for one existence can thrive. I honestly want to see a game confirming the fact that both universes, Resident Evil and Dead Space, are the same, but that lies in theory. Not only are both games made from completely different companies, EA for Dead Space, Capcom for RE, this just isn't confirmed by any means to begin with. I can simply see Isaac vs Umbrella featuring a returning villain from RE that still hasn't died yet, that being Wesker, but I don't think that will happen. If anything, I think that pretty much was the point in Dead Space. That's why in theory, I like to believe that the happenings of Dead Space was just cause it's the same universe as Resident Evil. We all seen what's happened in RE's universe and the shady happenings that occur in said universe. So for that to bleed down from one universe into the other, beside it just being the future, can't you count that as it being the same universe, where again, history is repeating itself? What do you believe? Do you believe Dead Space is actually just Resident Evil space? Do you believe Wesker could have been the mastermind behind the events of Dead Space for complete, universal saturation? Was Resident Evil space the point the devs were trying to make all along? Let me know down below. Love y'all, take care, I'ma see y'all in the next one, and peace.
My friends, is this what you hoped for when you signed your lives away to the church? Does this carnage carnage look like transcendence. I don't know what lies beyond death. Not anymore. But I do know our lives are more than just fuel for convergence. If we work together, we can fight this evil. It's not too late.